So real quick before we get started, good morning everyone. Welcome back to Forward CloudSec. This is real-world detection evasion techniques in the cloud. I'd like to thank our sponsors, especially our silver sponsor, SteamPipe. SteamPipe.io is an open source CLI to explore your cloud, code, logs, containers, and more with SQL. Run instant security assessments with 2,000 plus ready-to-use controls in your terminal, or visualize with hundreds of included dashboards you can customize with HCL and SQL. All right, just some quick notes. For those in the room, please silence your cell phones if you haven't done so already. Towards the end, we'll use the mic for questions, and for any remote attendees, please use Slack. And please welcome Christopher. Thank you.
Oh, wow. Friendly welcome. Thank you so much. So my name is Chris Doman. I'm the co-founder of Chaos Security, and I'm here to talk today about real-world detection evasion techniques in the cloud, which is quite a mouthful, and in hindsight would have chosen a shorter one, as you probably found when you were reading that out. So just to break that out a bit, what I'm going to be talking about is a couple of different things. So it's been quite kind of real-world focus in terms of some of the stuff that we and other people have been seeing recently in terms of like real-world attacks. And the kind of fun bit of that too is that it's all kind of adversarial, right? So it's people doing malicious stuff, and then we're all trying to detect it and stop it, and they're trying to find a way to get around that. So it's all a bit of kind of interesting back and forth. So that's why I'm talking about that. I guess part of that too is that these kind of more real-world attacks often are not the most high-end theoretical kind of stuff. They're more like day-to-day, kind of like the same things going over and over again that if you're working in a SOC, you've probably seen a lot. But it's still really interesting because even these kind of amateurs sometimes have some great innovation in terms of the way that they avoid being detected. So hence the title of the talk. So I guess what I'm saying is I'm going to be talking less around the kind of sexy Chris Hemsworth hacker from Black Hat. Have you seen that film? Good film. More around the kind of the Homer Simpsons, but still some really interesting kind of techniques in there. So I'm going to tell 3 stories, and the first one is around Doman, which is a piece of malware designed to run in a Lambda environment. We published a blog on this a couple of months ago. Got a fair amount of attention because it's somewhat novel seeing that kind of stuff going on. Seen a bit more since as well that I'll go into in a minute. But just to set the scene on that, you might have seen this tweet from the end of last year where Johnny Platts tweeted this, that he found a $45,000 bill. He logged into AWS console, something of a surprise. I think he says further down in the thread, he wasn't entirely sure how that compromise had happened. But still, he found out what kind of happened in a minute. And also, I mean, AWS were good on this too. From what I remember in the thread, they refunded that and helped them out too. So some great work from them as well there. And in terms of what this actually looked like, well, the investigators and he found some Lambda function on the schedule running this super simple bash script that you probably can't actually read on that screen, so maybe I should have done the black background there. But it's really simple. All this is doing is it's downloading XMRig, so cryptocurrency mining software, to the temp folder, which is where on a Lambda you're going to be writing kind of data to, and then it executes it, and it just points it at a standard Monero pool, so the money goes off to the attackers. So even though this probably billed Johnny 45K, they would not have made that much. Lambda's not obviously designed for like heavy duty computing. It's not like a massive GPU rig. Still pretty powerful. So why do it? If you haven't seen Zoolander, that GIF won't make any sense. But why Lambda malware? Well, it's because, at least I think it's because a bit of detection evasion there. So if you compromise someone's account and you spin up a bunch of EC2s to do some mining, spin down all the production workloads too, people start noticing that pretty quickly. I mean, both yourself, because some pretty good kind of detection technologies just across the levels for that. And also on the AWS side of the house too, they're really good now, and I'm sure you've seen some of the notifications they send. If they notice that kind of stuff happening, they will let you know, which is awesome. They detect that. But the Lambda, I mean, just newer environments, so just less stuff to pick that up so far. So that kind of background in terms of why that kind of stuff's happening, and to Doman. So my background originally is a malware researcher, looking at kind of feeds of malware coming in, some threat intel, and seeing what might be interesting. Now that I focus a bit more on cloud, I look for stuff that's bad, plus hit some cloud APIs. And that's how I found this sample, originally on VirusTotal, so just Google's like malware scanning service. They seemed to be doing something bad, and it was hitting AWS APIs. That's kind of how this started. So I tried running it in a sandbox, first thing to do, easy way of analyzing malware, and it crashed out with this error. Basically expected to be running Lambda. This is from the standard kind of library for Lambda imported here. So interesting at this point, it triggered some detections, but wasn't going to run. So I handed it off to my far more capable colleague, Matt, who's actually a proper reverse engineer. And the first thing he did was he ran it through redress. So redress is a tool for analyzing Go binaries. It'll tell you a bunch of stuff, including what libraries is it importing. In this case, found that it's importing AWS Lambda library, so doing something there, not surprisingly. And then a couple other things too, the AWS SDK, so maybe hitting some other functionality there too. And then also, a bit rarer, importing this DNS over HTTPS library as well for Go. Just go into a second. Since seen some subsequent versions of Denonia, because we're still seeing some new versions come out, and I've seen another one that imports a library for like dumping stuff from memory and then running it too, so that was kind of interesting. So still, I'll go into the minute, but there's some evolution there as well. So when you actually get this thing to run, the first thing it does is it looks up a domain name, denonia.xyz, hence why we/the attackers named it Denonia, and it points to an IP address, which is their Monero mining pool. So a couple of things going on here. We don't normally see malware doing DNS over HTTPS, but you do see a couple of slightly more sophisticated groups doing it now. And the reason for that is that obviously it's vanilla DNS. It goes over unencrypted over the internet, so anyone can intercept it. Hence why, from a privacy point of view, this is a good thing to start doing in your browser, DNS over HTTPS. But if you work in security, that kind of sucks, because then that means that it's a lot harder to then start doing, we're tracking what domain someone's looking up and other stuff too. You can do SSL termination, but then that's hard in some environments. And there's a talk later today about how to do some analysis in VPCs. I believe you're doing that later, so do check that out. I think we'll go into more detail there. But yeah, so that's kind of why they do this. It's detection evasion, at least why I assume you would do this. Yeah, and like I started that Homer Simpson bit, like I look at so much malware, and sadly it always ends up just dropping XMRig. And you're always hoping it's going to be something really exciting. It always just drops XMRig. So what these guys are doing is they're dropping XMRig to the temp directory. No, sorry, they're not dropping it. They're dropping the XMRig config to the temp directory, because that's where you can write to in Lambda. The XMRig itself, again, probably for evasion, they load it from memory and just run it from there. So a little bit hard to detect there too. And they use a few different usernames. So here it's EchoNet, but a couple of different things they do. So yeah, a few kind of smartish things they do. I mean, for one thing, they name the binary Python. It's not Python. Not sure that's going to trick you or not. DNS over HTTPS, custom Monero server. That's important because if you look at that first example I showed from Johnny Platt on Twitter, that was a well-known mining pool. So you can just detect the IP address, even over like SSL or TLS or whatever. Just if someone talks to the IP address, you know someone's doing some mining, but they set the custom one to stop that. XMRig memory. And then as standard, they hid the file by starting with a dot, which is that classic Linux, Unix bug/feature. So as I mentioned, since we published our blog, no massive updates, but we have seen a few more samples. So someone's still distributing this, it's still getting out there. One kind of tantalizing piece we haven't got to the bottom of is if you look at this malware, and then you look at some malware published by Rock, a really well-known group of kind of miners from last year, very, very similar. It's in Go, it's doing DNS over HTTPS, it's running XMRig from memory. There's some really similar stuff going on there too. So maybe it's them, maybe they're friends, maybe they took inspiration, but there's definitely some kind of link there, I think. Still a bunch of unanswered questions. I know a few different people are looking at this, so it'll be interesting what comes out. How does it actually get deployed? That's like a really key question, right? There's some discussions on Twitter from various people from CloudSec talking about it. Standard credential theft, pretty likely. Maybe some other compromises, we'll find out. Obviously, you do need to actually invoke a Lambda function, so what are they doing setting up to call that? Probably just standard schedule again. And then finally, when you're reversing the malware, there's doing a bunch of stuff with SQS queues. I'm not sure what it's doing. It's really hard to reverse. I know another vendor is doing some more reversing on that, so great to see if they come up with something there. But there's still unanswered questions in terms of the actual binary. What is it doing with those SQS queues? So maybe you guys know. Let me have any theories. And yeah, we're still seeing more versions. So the last one I saw was last week. It's not loads. It's not like a thing to worry about, but it's just interesting that it's still happening. Cool. So that was Denonia. So on to the kind of second kind of interesting set of attackers doing detection evasion. Team TNT, these days pretty famous, so good chance you're going to talk on them before. But when we first came across them, there's only one blog out there by Trend Micro. So it was interesting seeing them evolve over the years and how they got, over the 2 years before they kind of went away again, and how they got better over time. So again, I was looking at a bunch of malware that was interesting, came across this sample. This is just like a bash script that steals your AWS cred file. As you can see there, it's taking .aws/credentials, you all know that file, sending it across the attacker's server, so that URL ending PHP. So really simple way of stealing it. I won't go into the wider stuff in terms of time, because it's a short talk, but this compromise normally happens via Open Docker or Open Kubernetes APIs, sometimes some exploits too. So anyway, they steal those keys. Over time, they got better. So they're doing some other interesting stuff. This is a few months on. They're now doing things like stealing from Docker environment variables. It starts with the word like AWS, so AWS underlying secret key, they'll steal that and send it off. Proc as well, stealing any environment variable. So they're kind of getting better, stealing more stuff. You see them starting to hit the metadata URL as well. So they're hitting that 169 address there. And finally, this is pretty much the last version I saw from them in terms of what they're doing with this. So by this point, they're just scraping the entire metadata URL. So not just security credentials, but everything they could. Also hitting the EKS equivalent metadata IP2, which is slightly different. So that's kind of interesting to see as well. Again, they just take all this stuff and then send it off to their server. And they have like 2 or 3 servers. They don't really bother hiding them much. They do try and hide some other stuff, though, which we'll get into in a minute. And not to feel left out, still a bunch of other things as well. So files from these systems, they can then spread and sometimes manually, sometimes automatically spread around. Here's doing GCP creds, so it's doing the access tokens DB and credentials.db. Azure is missing from this list, sadly, in terms of like cross-platform support. But they did say on their Twitter account, because they do have a Twitter account, which is a weird thing to do, that Azure support is coming soon. But that tweet's a bit old now. And as you see in a second, these guys are really unusual. They've compromised thousands, tens of thousands of different systems. Like I have friends that were compromised at TMT and TM. Many of you may have responded to some of this stuff. Like really, really like, they spread a lot. They had a counter on their website showing how many systems they compromised for a while with like thousands of them. They would, because open service to you, you could see the compromise and sometimes let people know. So they make a joke of it, but it also was quite a real problem as well. So in terms of like key theft, so they steal the keys, they send it off to the server, as I said, and this is what it looks like in Wireshark, so just what you expected. In response, their server just says, thanks. That's the bit in blue down the bottom, it says thanks. That's a nice touch from them. As mentioned, the server is pretty open, so you can go through, you can pull some of the back-end code as well. It's always interesting to see. So you can just make a local copy and see that, because it's fully open. But I think they started to notice people doing this after a while, because they leave this message in one of their folders, so you're looking through at night, trying to find some malware, and it's like they've got that message on one of their folders. That's in another one, so if you're browsing through the open directories, that's in the index.html, so you can see that instead. And then after a while, it started to get really weird. This is one of them, so there's a sound that goes along with this, which is basically the rock shouting at you. So quite a strong feeling. Though at this point, people have written a couple of blogs, and they weren't very happy people were reporting on their malware. And then I'll go this one pretty quickly, but finally they left this on. I blanked that out. They left some rude GIFs on there too, so saying if you're here, then please don't steal our malware and write about it. So weird guys, basically. So yeah, we published a blog on this a while ago, and it got a bit of attention because at that time it was novel to see someone stealing AWS creds in that kind of way. Now it's pretty standard, a lot of people do it, but at the time a bit new. Off the back of that, like the day after, we got this really weird comment on our blog, and we're pretty sure it was Team TNT because the from address on it was their email address, which they leave in their malware, weirdly enough. And it said all this kind of crazy stuff. It said that we're incompetent dilettantes. Said that our YARA rule, so our detection rule, wasn't very good, which hurt me personally because I wrote that YARA rule. Weird stuff. And I heard from other companies that have also written stuff about them. They do the same thing too. So strange guys. Oh, and they have their website where they serve the malware from with like a banner on the front. They also changed it to say they're going to go away forever. I don't trust Kedar security, so ours as well. They said that on their website, which is nice. But about 1 week after they posted this saying they're going away forever, we started seeing their next malware campaign. So they did not go away forever. So don't trust them either. They have pretty much retired though now. We haven't seen much of them in a while. So interesting kind of back and forth there though. So we've got 5 minutes left. So closing off the last one fairly quickly. I won't go into Watchdog, but yet another kind of mining campaign that particularly targets cloud container. But they use some really interesting stuff in terms of detection evasion. Again, not rocket science, but I think it works for them. So for one thing, they stick all their malware in a folder called ... So this definitely confused me. So when you're listing it out on the box, and it's like there's a dot, it's not the parent directory. It's actually, that's where their malware is. So, you're on the EC2, check that out. Also, there's amazing like rootkits out there that will try and hide themselves through clever ways of like unhooking in memory, that kind of stuff. These guys don't bother with that. All they do is they overwrite PS, so Linux tool to list out the processors, with their own bash script that calls the original PS and then reverse grep, so it hides their own process. So all it is like 5-liner script that then just hides their process, so you can't see it when it's running. Nice bit of anti-forensics here too. So you'll see there that they're running the touch command, so they're changing the file timestamp as well. So if you look at like the PS file, it would look like it was from 3 years ago. So a bit of evasion there too. Cool. So kind of wrapping up a bit here. Could talk about some other examples and have a time to people published around other real-world stuff that's going on. Profero wrote a fantastic report around some stuff they'd seen, like AMI, global compromises, I think, and some other stuff there too. Sophos did an interesting thing around some SSM commands being abused, some kind of quite targeted attackers kind of using that to move laterally. Obviously, a lot of stuff going on in terms of like backdooring software packages too. I say it'd be great to see something that isn't just Capital One or leak get secrets again, but also I'd love to see more on the Capital One attack if we can get the full details there. Yeah, and finally, I mean, if you haven't seen Strat's Red Team, worth checking it out. Great free open source tool from Christoph at Datadog. Great for just like testing out your detections with fairly real-world techniques. So you can see, how would this look in your environment without actually compromising your environment. And a few shout-outs. So big thank you to Trend Micro, Intez at Acrosec, Talos. They all did some great write-ups on these guys as well. So would well recommend reading some of their stuff if you're into this. Also, our publications, we'll check them out. We wrote the one on Denonia, the one on Team TNT, and also Watchdog too. So a few kind of references there. Yeah, I mean, that's it. I've just about finished on time. So yeah, that's all. Next talk's at 50 past, I believe. So there is time for some questions if anyone has any.
We have a microphone at the back of the room, so if anyone has questions.
Or I can just shout them out if we can't get it over to you.
Yeah, I was just curious, is the Lambda malware sample available for anyone to check out if they want to?
Yeah, it's on there. So we put the hash on our blog. Also, Matt, my colleague, tweeted out the newer samples as well, so the hash is there. So they're on VirusTotal. You need a paid subscription for that, but we also upload them to Hybrid Analysis, which has got a free one, free downloads as well. So, or just like tweet me if you can't get a copy of it. But yeah, you should be able to, if you search the hash, you'll find the free downloads.
Cool. Thank you.
If you can find the SQ stuff, that'd be cool. So, yeah, work it out. Yeah, it'd be interesting.
Other questions for Chris?
I'm always relieved when there aren't loads of questions, because the biggest fear as a speaker
People
is
are still waking up.
Okay, yeah, that's great. No, because otherwise, like someone asks a question, you don't know the answer, and then you have to pretend you do, or do you admit you don't? I don't know. Oh, I think there's a question there.
From indicators of compromise perspective, is there a list that we can pass to our SOC team to start looking for, similar to what you have seen here?
So is the question from the AWS side of the house, how would you kind of track this stuff and keep finding it? Yeah, sure. So I'm happy to send you over the YARA rules that we run. So we run them across VirusTotal to pick up interesting cloud malware. So I'll give you a business card, you can email me, I'll send it over. We're talking to some of the AWS security team too, and we get them heads up on samples when we can. But basically, I mean, I also gave a hint back here for this stuff, the new donor samples. The easiest way sometimes is, going a long way back here. If you just look for samples that talk to like cloudflaredns.com, so on the online sandboxes or run your own, obviously there's like 3 or 4 malware families that all do HTTPS over DNS. Denonia is one of them. So you pick up this, you pick up one bit of like Russian targeted malware from the government, and then 2 other pieces of cybercrime. So you can also track that. But yeah, I'll give you a card and I'll send you the rules that we're running.
Thank you.
Thank you. For the techniques for other clouds, are they very similar to what we see on AWS, like CREDs and Lambda functions, similar to app functions?
Yeah, so I mean, I haven't seen anything targeting or like running in like Azure functions or your GCP equivalents. I'm sure it's there. I probably just look for it less for one thing, given I've got all these rules set up for AWS in particular. I mean, it's inevitably some stuff there. We'll see what comes out. You do see like sort of Team TNT stealing some GCP creds and those kind of things as well. I mean, it all works pretty similarly. I know that like the metadata URL is obviously slightly different AWS, but apart from that, it's all very similar setup. So, I mean, you can steal those creds and that kind of stuff.
Any additional questions? All right, thank you, Chris. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much.